Hi, I'm Benjamin Mac Jackson, founder of the World War II Veterans History Project. I started this project in the summer of 2015 with the goal of providing knowledge and inspiration to my generation so they can better appreciate and understand what these heroes went through. My mission is to preserve the memories of the greatest generation. In this story, World War II Army veteran Manuel Freitas speaks about the harsh conditions while fighting in one of the most deadly and difficult battles of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. His encounter with a fearsome Tiger tank will take you back to what the world was like for the frontline fighters in the Ardennes during World War II. While engaged in fierce combat with the German belligerents, his feet froze and he was transferred to a field hospital. The details of his incredible journey of survival is riveting. Here's his story.
Private Manuel Freitas, U.S. Army. I was in the Armored Infantry Division. It's mechanized more so than a regular division. We have half tracks that we travel in, except in the front lines. I took my training in Anniston, Alabama, Fort McClellan. Infantry training, 17 weeks. When I got to the scale, it was two guys, one sitting down like you, and a tall guy sitting, taking care of he reads to that guy puts down. Well, this was in Boston when I was going through the exam. He says to the guy, 5'2", I look like that, and then he weighs me, and he says 115 pounds. So he says, okay, step down. So I grabbed the scale, and I wouldn't get down. He says, see what I said? Step down. I says, no. He says, what's the matter with you? I says, nothing. I said, you're putting false statements down on that paper. And they were, because the requirement was 115 pounds and 5'2". I was 4'11 and a half, and I weighed 107 pounds. I really was a skinny little thing. And in the meantime, while we're arguing, there's other guys that want to get going. They want to, because after the examination, you go back home. You know, you get back to where they, get the train. But anyway, with all the commotion going on, some major I didn't know the rank at the time, but I found out after. He says, what's all the goddamn noise over here? So the guy, not the one sitting, the other guy, he says that, no, he won't get off. He says, because we're putting false statements on the paper. He looks at me, he says, what's the matter? I says, he says I'm 5'2", which I'm not. I'm 4'11 and a half. And I weigh 107 pounds. He puts down 115. See, that was the requirements at that time. So anyway, he says, okay, he told the guy sitting down, scratch everything off, knock it all off. So he did, scratched it all off. He says, now let's do it again. So the guy puts the thing on my head, he's 4'11 and a half. He says, put it down. So the guy put it down. The weight, 107 pounds. He says, put it down. So the guy put it down. I looked at that guy and I says, thank you. And I got off the scale. Of course, it didn't mean nothing because I went anyway. That was my story of getting into the Army. But I also said that I'm going to be one of the best infantrymen in my battalion, and I was. One time when they got us on the rifle range firing a grenade, and that gives you a hell of a kick. Well, the guy was our instructor. He was a corporal. He was a rugged guy. When he fired that grenade, it rocked him back like this. I said, oh my God, and I'm telling my friend, I said, if that did that to him, it's going to break my shoulder up. So I refused to fire it. And when we got back to camp, I was called to the CO, he was a captain, company commander, and he says, what's this report I got? You refused to fire the grenade. I said, sir, Corporal I forget his name, Corporal so-and-so fired that grenade from the '03 rifle, and that thing knocked him back at least a foot, and he's smiling. He knows what I was talking about. And I said to the corporal, I said, if I fire that thing, that's going to break my shoulder. That's going to knock me a mile back, he said. So he looked at me and he's sizing me up. He says, you know something? You're right. He says, continue on. I said, okay. So we went to eat. It was supper time. Well, the next time we went, no more firing from the shoulder. You fire it from put the rifle against a tree or against the ground, and you fire that grenade. The mountain had cans, big 5-gallon open bucket cans, and that was the target. But at the end of the 17 weeks, they come and get me with an ambulance, put me in the hospital, saying that I had a hernia. It was wild, anyway. I wouldn't sign the operation because I was told that I didn't have to sign it, and they would never send me overseas. And so anyway, 2 weeks after that, they come with 2 MPs to put me in the brig. I said, what did I do? They said, well, you didn't sign the paper, so they need the bed for somebody else. So I signed the papers. 3 months after, I was sent overseas, which they said I'd never get sent overseas, but I would get limited duty, which was all a crock of bull. So anyway, I went to Germany. From there, they put us in cattle cars and shipped us over to the Belgium, where the Battle of the Bulge started. Well, for one good thing, it wasn't as bad as facing the enemy because we had them on the run. In other words, we were chasing them. So it wasn't really as bad as if they were coming at us and us facing them and all that, Well, I remember when I saw the biggest tank in Germany, when we were patrolling, we were walking up the road. I was a scout, along with 2 other scouts. I was the middle scout. And we come into an intersection, and we heard this metal. When you hear like a tank on a road, you can hear the clanging of the metal. And we confronted each other, and we said, "Do you hear that noise?" And they said, "Yeah, let's creep up there and find out what it is." So we went up to of course it's all wooded area. We went up to the intersection, and we saw this. God, what a tank. That was the worst experience I had as far as being scared and everything, because I never saw their big tanks before. And man, this thing was a monster. And so we came back and we told the sergeant, and they got everybody off the roads into the woods. And we're just watching, and as the tank come to the intersection, and they had that big gun, and they stopped, and that turret, or whatever they call it, turned around, looked one way with that gun, turned around, looked the other way, and then looked forward, and then they started going. And we didn't see it no more. So that was the scariest time of my life, when I saw that tank. Each member of the squad we had the half track. When we get relieved from combat, we get into our half track, and they already know where we're going to stay, sleep. Could be a hotel someplace, or a farm, and things like that. And we each had a 50 caliber box from ammunition, of course empty, and we kept all our belongings there. But anyway, I froze my feet in the Battle of the Bulge. I was in a foxhole for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. I still don't know the exact amount of days because it was so cold. And then, first thing I know, an ambulance come after me. They were relieving my outfit. And I went from the foxhole into an ambulance. Naturally, when I went from the foxhole to the ambulance, I don't know whatever happened to all that stuff. My wallet, watch, and things like that. Because when you go into combat, you put everything you want that's of value, into that box. It's got your name on it. But I lost it all. And I ended up in England 3.5 months in a hospital. Then at first they decided they were going to amputate my feet. They were going to send me to the States. They put a tag on me with a card that said LPP, Litter Patient by Plane. So anyway, something happened to the airfield and the planes couldn't land or take off, and that saved my bacon because one of the doctors, which was a major, he noticed a slight color on my feet. My feet were like this. So anyway, the next morning, instead of making his rounds, and I was in the middle of the ward, he came right to my bed along with his aides, and he looked and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, "take that tag off." So anyway, 2 weeks from that day, I was walking after 3.5 months in the hospital. One lieutenant, and I forget where the heck he was. I don't know if it was Fort McClellan or Fort Dix, I think it was, when I come back. He says to me, he says, "Hey, can I probe the United States Army to find out if you were the smallest guy ever in the service?" I says, "No, I don't want to go through that baloney." I didn't want to. So that's what he wanted to do. So I believe that I probably was the smallest guy that was ever in the United States Army. When I come home, I was on a hospital ship coming into New York Harbor, and everybody that was on that ship had tears in their eyes when they saw that Statue of Liberty. Everybody, you look around and all the soldiers had tears in their eyes. We went to Fort Dix. But all my stuff, my clothes, we dyed everything. My mother says it's cheaper to buy a box of dye, and we'll dye the stuff all black, Eisenhower jacket and everything. And that's how we wore out all the clothes, shoes and everything. Well, after the war, I worked in a cotton mill for 10 years, but I worked nights, and I was sick of that. I didn't like working nights, and so I quit that, and I went to a company that come from Brooklyn, New York. They made silverware, kitchen tools, all that stuff. And I worked there for 32 years. A lot of guys used to make fun of me because of my size. They always picked on little guys, always, even here, until I got this hat. Thank God to the honor flight. They're a great bunch of people. If you know any veterans that live around your area and they haven't gone, they war, especially even Vietnam now, that's what they're going to get now. You should tell them, go on a flight. It'll be a day they'll remember the rest of their lives.
Mr. Freitas went on to work in the steel industry after the war. He currently lives in the Villages, Florida. He is 91 years old. In this story, Tuskegee Airman Daniel Keel talks about the horrible racial discriminations that were endured by the African American soldiers in the Army Air Corps during World War II. Flight Officer Keel discusses how he became one of the few recruits to pass training due to a white officer's undermining of the group. Here's his story.
Daniel Keel, Tuskegee Airman. I was a flight officer, and I was a navigator, bombardier, and pilot. I had no intention of going in, as I said before, into the Army unless I was drafted. I had a good job, heck, girlfriends, a car. Why should I? But as I said, I took the test just in case I would be drafted. And I'm glad I did, because when the draft board drafted me, when they took a look at me, saw I was a Negro, the first thing came out of his mouth was Navy. And with the letter I had received from the general after I passed the test, that made it possible for me to get in the Air Force instead of being put in the Navy. My brother was put in the Navy, and he was a cook. So you can see what would have happened to me if I'd have been, chances are, if I'd have been put in the Navy. Our group was scheduled to go to combat in September of 45, and as you know, the atomic bomb ended the war in August of 45. The Tuskegee Airmen showed the world that if a Negro was given the opportunity, with a good education, hard work, and a little luck, we could do the job as well as anyone else. We had many obstacles to overcome that we did it. And we believe that our performance during World War II played an important role in President Harry Truman ordering the armed forces desegregated in 1948. Although true desegregation didn't really start taking place until 1970, and it took 4 days of intense rioting at Travis Air Force Base to bring it about. The myth that we had to overcome back in those days, our brain was supposed to be 25% smaller than yours. We Tuskegee Airmen also believed that if Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt hadn't been a staunch supporter of our cause, the Tuskegee experiment had never gotten off the ground. And if it had gotten off the ground, we doubt very much we would have been sent overseas to prove that we could do if we were given the opportunity. You see, when President Roosevelt finally ordered the Army to start training Negroes to become pilots, over 15,000 of us took and passed the exam, but they only took 10%. But before those 10% was taken, we had to take another test. That was a two-part test. The first part of the test was called a psychological test. It was a multiple choice test, and it lasted 8 hours. The second part of the test wasn't so bad. It was only a psychometric test. It only lasted 4 hours. And of the 10% of us that was finally chosen, about 80% of us made it all the way through. Now, at the end of I took that second test at the end of the 2 months of basic training. When I took the second test, there was 300 of us that took the test, but they only took 10%. I was fortunate to be one of the 10%. When I was sent to Biloxi, Mississippi, I was the only one who arrived in a Pullman car. All the rest of them came in what we call the cattle car. Cattle car was you had the engine, you had the mail car, then you had the Negroes car, then you had the white folks car in the back. Because when the train went down the track, the smoke came down. It usually came down just where the Negroes cars were at. When the Negro, if you were dressed in white, I can assure you, when you got to your destination, your clothes were not white. But the only time a Negro was in a Pullman car was the Pullman porters. But when they gave me my ticket to go to Biloxi, Mississippi, they made sure they gave me one in a Pullman car, and they told me, when you get in this car, it's going to make several changes. Don't get off it, because if you get off it, you will not be able to get back on it again. So I never got off, so I was the only one of the 300 who arrived there in a Pullman car. All the rest of them arrived in the other car. I was very lucky. Right after we arrived at Midland Army Air Base, a white officer came up to us and told us that he was Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, that he was the deputy commander of Midland Army Air Base, that he was born in Texas, he was raised in Texas, and he expected to die in Texas. And if we Negroes didn't know our place while we were in his state of Texas, he spelled it out for us. 1, we could not eat in the officer's mess. 2, we could not go in the officers' club. 3, if we go to the theater, we could not sit in the officers' section. And 4, if we go to town, we had to ride the back of the bus. 12 o'clock sharp, we arrived at the cadet mess hall to eat our noonday meal. Meals back in those days were called breakfast, dinner, and supper. 12:05, 10, 15, 20, 21, no food. But we observed that every time a group of white cadets came in, they were promptly fed. After the last group came in was fed, the mess sergeant and his crew started bringing us officers what was left of the food. By this time, we were so angry that we told the mess sergeant and his crew to take the food they were bringing us and shove it, walked over to the officers' mess, and demand that we be fed. Of course, when we walked in the officers' mess hall, the crew, they were shocked, because until we walked in there, they didn't know there was any black officers on the base. But they quickly recovered and asked us why we were so late coming to eat our dinner. We told him what happened. He told us he was sorry to hear that, but he would see what he could do for us now because he thought he had fed the last officer. But when we come in for our supper meals and all other meals, we would be treated with respect and dignity of any other officer. We told him thank you, that's all we wanted to hear. Went in to supper that night, no problem. Breakfast the next morning, no problem. Right after breakfast, Phelps and his crew came over our quarters, demanding to know why we had disobeyed his orders by not eating in the cadet mess hall. We told him what had taken place, and he told us that excuse wasn't good enough for him, and for disobeying his orders, we're going to have each and every one of us court-martialed. One of my classmates who had spent a year at the Pentagon in D.C. before becoming a navigator said to us, if we're going to be court-martialed, let's not be court-martialed by a lieutenant colonel. Let's be court-martialed by a general. Of course, we all said, what difference does it make a court-martial being a court-martial? And his answer was, it just looked better on our record saying we're court-martialed by a general than a lieutenant colonel. We said, good, then write us a letter. A couple hours later, a letter was brought over to my quarters. After reading the letter, I asked him, had my other classmates seen it? He said, I was the last one to see it because my quarters happened to be the last one in the barracks. So I asked him, did they approve it? The answer was yes. Then I said, if they read it and approved it, why aren't there any signatures on the letter? He said, well, the answer was that although each and every one of my classmates who had read and approved the letter didn't want to sign it because they figured he who signed it first, Phelps would be considered the ringleader. So I said, I'll be damned, that leaves just me. So I was the first one to sign the letter. Then afterwards, most but not of my classmates co-signed the letter. Later that afternoon, we sent the letter airmail special delivery to the Southwestern Commanding General and placed a copy on the base commander's desk. 2 or 3 days later, a group of white officers came to our quarters and told us the general was on the base and ordered every white officer on the base to meet with him in the base theater to discuss our situation. That's where they were going, and after the meeting was over, they would come back and give us a report. About an hour or so later, they came back and gave us a report. After all the white officers had assembled in the base theater, the general threw out the question, how should we Negroes be treated while we're on the base? And the discussion became so heated that a fist fight broke out amongst some of the white officers in the base theater, and the only way the general was able to quell the melee was by having the national anthem played. After order was restored, we told the officers in the theater that though we were Negroes, we were officers in the United States Army Air Force. And being officers in the United States Air Force, we will be treated with the same respect, dignity, and privileges of any other officer on that base, period. Walked off the podium, followed by the base commander. No sooner had the door closed on the two men when Phelps told the officers in the theater before dismissing him that he would get him and those Negroes was the last thing he ever did. 2 weeks later, the temperature, this was in Midland, Texas, was about 100 degrees in the shade, and the humidity was sky high. And he ordered our quarters, and our quarters only, to have a gas mask drill. A gas mask drill back in those days was when you had to wear a full face gas mask for 4 hours. And to make sure that we got the full benefit of it, He ordered us to work between 1 and 5, the hottest part of the day, confined to our barracks. Now, my quarters happened to be the last one in the barracks. So I had 2 exposed walls. So with 2 exposed walls, I had 2 windows. So hopefully, if a breeze came up, it'd come through one window, go out the other. So my roommate and I invited 4 of our closest classmates to spend a miserable afternoon in our quarters. 2 or 3.5 hours later, we heard doors being opened and closed. Now, we knew that could only be Phelps and his crew checking up on us to see how miserable we were. The lieutenant colonel said, "I see you 6 men are not wearing your gas masks, and I'm going to have each and every one to court-martial." One of my classmates said, "Lieutenant Colonel, sir, the drill you're putting us through now, Army regulation that states that drill shall be carried out only once every 6 months. If you would check our records, just before we left Hondo, we had this drill. So therefore, on the Army regulation, we're not required to have it again for another 5 months." That ended that court-martial attempt. 2 weeks before graduation, we were told Phelps was doing everything in his power to have us sent to some godforsaken island in the Pacific. The white folks, bombardiers came and told us that, but they said they know Phelps was wasting his time, because there's nowhere in hell where the Army back in those days gonna let a black navigator tell a white pilot where to go. So consequently, they were right. 2 weeks later, found us at Gardner Field, where the Negro pilots were transitional training. Now, the reason why there were no black bomber pilots in combat at that time, because the commanding officer of Gardner Field was a racist, and his immediate boss was a racist. Now, the reason why we believe we made it through Midland Army Air Base without any casualties, because Midland Army Air Base was not only a training center, it was an R&R base for return combat bombardiers. And those return combat bombardiers, knowing what the Red Tears had done for them while they were in combat, made it possible for them to be back there. So that in their mind, Phelps was unable to coerce them, bribe them, or intimidate them anyway to have some of us thrown out of pilot training. Knowing that Phelps was on my back, when the opportunity presented itself to us to get out of the service, I was the first one to get out. And I went in 43, September 43, and I resigned from the Air Force when I was able to in February of 46.
Mr. Keel went on to become an electrical engineer after the war and currently resides in Claremont, Florida. He is 92 years old. To learn more about the World War II Veterans History Project, please visit our website at www.veteranshistoryproject.com. We look forward to seeing you again for more exciting stories from the greatest generation.
Production support for the Veterans History Project is made possible by the Parity Financial Group, proudly saluting the extraordinary students who make up our future generation, and the military veterans from the greatest generation.